People no longer bound by their non-disclosure agreements. What can you now disclose? Funny story. Moments after I was unceremoniously fired because my tech skills were found to be insufficient, the bosses who fired me demanded to know the whereabouts of a hugely important computer file I had worked on. I refused to help them. I even cited the exact language of the NDA I was compelled to sign. I'm prohibited from disclosing details of my employment with anyone, including past and current employees of the company. I expounded, adding, "So ask someone who works here, because I don't." It was a great FU moment that I still cherish 5 years later, but now I think I can disclose the truth. I only hid behind the NDA language because I had no clue where to find their damn computer file or even where to look. I suck with computers. Next story. My graphic designer best friend won my town's Design the Centennial logo contest, despite having never set foot in the town. I worked for the radio station and just did an interview with one of the organizers, where he lamented that there weren't very many entries. So I called my friend and said, "Want in on this?" He said, "Sure." As he lived on the other side of the country at the time, I spent the next day texting him photos of the town for inspiration. Anyway, when he won and they found out he was a professional graphic designer who lived on the other side of the country, they made him and me sign NDAs because the town was afraid people would think they brought in a ringer. Edit. Let me answer some of the more common questions being brought up. What's a ringer? A ringer is a professional who's brought into a contest in order to guarantee favored results. Why did I have to sign the NDA? Well, they unveiled the logo at a great big ceremony where they presented the prize money. I think it was a couple $100. And since my friend lived on the other side of the country, he asked if I could accept on his behalf. I wound up not going because we were broadcasting from another event that day, so the mayor accepted on his behalf. Where is this? Canada, a small town in Alberta. That's all I'm comfortable sharing. Next story. I was a contractor for NASA. I still fully support the agency, but I was extremely bugged when I learned that each separate NASA center, like JPL, Kennedy, Ames, Goddard, hides many of its inventions and breakthroughs from the other centers so that when HQ is ready to assign a big mission and a lot of dollars to one center, they have a better chance to compete over the others. Look what we invented. Ames can't do this over there. Give us the next moon orbiter. The downside is that there's a ton of reinvention and duplicated efforts going on. Sometimes years of work go down the drain when another center does the same thing faster. My perspective was, you all work for NASA. Share knowledge. Collaborate. I was frequently ordered to tone down anything revealing when speaking to other centers. Next story. I dug up some ancient bones, gold, and Mycenaean tombs. I couldn't discuss the finds until the institution who ran the archaeological dig had published the data. Edit to add, I'm a classic student, not the one running the whole gig, but my role in it was very much legal and official, lol. We knew to dig there because there is another tomb next to it, and it's located near a big Mycenaean Bronze Age palace. I only dug there for one summer, but it was a blast. If you're interested in archaeology, you should see if there are any local groups that you can volunteer with. Next story. I used to do data analysis of revenue management for some big companies. Many companies have no clue about their data or their revenue streams. I'm talking several $1 million of revenue disappearing in the pipeline and no one knowing what happened with it, or even caring really. There were multiple times I had to inform clients that we had huge gaps in their costs and we needed to find the missing numbers somewhere in order to make our final reports correct, and was met with the paraphrased reply. Just sprinkle the missing costs over the existing one. We just want the final total to be correct. All the companies cared about if the amount of money they have at the end of the year is higher than at the beginning, and anything that happens in between is inconsequential. I objected at first to my bosses, saying that what we were doing was incorrect, but they said to just do as the client said. In the end, I got disillusioned, and whenever our clients came with requests that made no mathematical or logical sense, I just execute as requested and let their analysts figure out later that the analyst they paid 6 figures for was basically nonsense. I didn't care because I had documentation of all their requests and my objections, which were thoroughly ignored. I had a few cases where clients came back disgruntled several months down the line after some in-house analysts had done a deep dive of their data and came up with my name. My choice of action was to tell them to pound sand, but my bosses always bent over backwards for clients, so we'd have to do the cleanup I anticipated. In the end, I learned most of our company is held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. At most, 10% of people working at big companies are competent and carry the bulk of the work, and rarely are the competent ones the ones in charge. Edit. I want to clarify something for everyone who's talking about embezzlement and people lining their pockets. I can assure you that in the data I was working on, this was very unlikely. The money streams I was analyzing went to other companies as costs. So if they had literally disappeared, someone would notice. This missing money was really just a case of utter incompetence. People just too lazy or stupid to properly keep track of what goes where. I'm sure that if we got all the data from partnering companies, we would eventually be able to track everything precisely. We were unfortunately limited to whatever data our clients provided, and we would rarely get data from other companies as they're quite privy about sharing it with third parties. This rant was not about corruption, but rather incompetence. Next story. When I was fired from Auntie Anne's in 2010, I signed a 10-year, non-complete NDA contract, promising not to detail the baking secrets or work for another pretzel establishment. Well, that ended this year, so now I can run out and start a pretzel store because the secret I was keeping was making pretzels literally requires two products, one of them being water and the other a large bag of pretzel meal, dust, and powder. Quite literally, anyone with $2,500 can start a pretzel stand and make perfectly fine pretzels. It's not difficult whatsoever. Okay, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around this one. So you had to sign a 10-year NDA after being fired, and it prevented you from working at another pretzel establishment for 10 years? That's kind of weird, but I guess anything can be put in fine print these days. Next story. I think I'm finally ready to let the world know my secret. If you've ever used Verisite, the loading spinners you see when the report loads aren't waiting for anything. People kept complaining that reports were coming back too fast, so it must not be working right. It doesn't take long to complete a few hundred Google searches simultaneously. So the loading spinner just makes you wait a few seconds longer, so it feels like more is happening. So glad to finally get that off my chest. Next story. I worked at a small bakery in New York City when I was younger. Every morning, the bakery would take their day-old cupcakes and deliver them to a tour company that did Sex and the City tours. The tour company would pass our cupcakes off as cupcakes from Magnolia, and significantly much more popular bakery. Next story. McDonald's made me sign an NDA regarding a robbery that took place during a graveyard shift. They made me take a effing polygraph test because they thought my ex and I were involved due to the simple fact that I had stopped by that day to pick up some documents. I was a manager. I had business to do. F you, McMurda. Edit. There are many questions. Some wonder if I made this up. Request details or explanations. I'll give some extra context and I'll head out. I was around 19 to 20 years old. This was almost a decade ago. I was pretty naive then. By the time I realized this might have been illegal, I mentioned to a co-manager and she advised me to not bring it up again as to not involve myself in trouble or damage my future job prospects. I worked at a franchise located in a rural area with an almost entire Latino population, where everyone knows each other. I took home some of the weekly schedules and production projections for highlighting. They would make me do this highlighting crap weekly. The store manager in charge would allow me to do this on a weekly basis. The area supervisor called to tell me I'd have to take a polygraph test. He mentioned that I could decline taking the polygraph test, but I'd be taken off the schedule and I wouldn't be trusted again. The police showed up to the restaurant, picked me up, held me at the investigation building for around 8 hours, and then they sent me home. When I passed the polygraph test, the area supervisor called again to mention that he appreciated that I took the polygraph, glad to hear I passed, and that he would always have my back. I roll. I left the job at McDonald's in 2014. At least it makes for a story to tell. Next story. I used to work for a large gas station chain. I worked at its warehouse where it creates a lot of the donuts. The room was really hot, so we were always sweating. There's some machines where the donuts get glazed in chocolate. They're these small machines. They look almost like a barbecue grill. They always wanted us to be super fast glazing the donuts. Working in a hot room and working at super fast speeds, it was natural for a lot of people's sweat to just drip in the chocolate underneath us. Never eat the chocolate donuts from a gas station. Yeah, so this is one of those classic out of sight, out of mind. You wonder often how many bodily fluids you're actually consuming in food that is prepared in sweatshops like this. Sweat, Saliva. Ew. Hard pass. Next story. In the IT world, it's often that the piece of internal software or system that gives our company an edge is not quite as huge a deal as it seems. Often, it's not much more than a couple of technologies mashed together to automate things in a way nobody else is doing yet. And those things are fiercely guarded. I had cases where people saw stuff in action and tried to replicate it, but could not because they were missing just one small piece. Next story. I'd rather not risk it, but let's just say, hypothetically, that a certain tech company who is inside keeps its campuses pretty subpar. I'm talking old, rundown buildings that need dozens of buckets everywhere to catch water every time it rains. They bully companies and the local economy to put up with their crap because they know they're too big to hear a no. Hypothetically. Edit. I feel like I'm about to get a very angry and legal jargon-filled phone call. Next story. Never had an NDA on this, but if I give too much info, I'll get tagged and likely get in serious trouble. BCBS had a severe security breach back in 2007. If you were with them in a certain area of the country and ever called them the number for help on your account, all of your personal info was caught by a third party. Every caller, every piece of data. They never disclosed this breach. Next story. The head shop, smoke shop I used to work at sold whippets, nitrous cartridges, behind the counter under the guise of being cake ingredients. All someone had to do was walk in and say they were looking to bake a cake. I'm not sure if they still do it, but I wouldn't be surprised. Next story. I once had to sign an NDA to get a price on a printer for my sign shop. This was a printer that was only sold by one distributor, by the way, so there wasn't even any direct competition on this particular model. I think the gimmick was that if they make a really big deal out of giving you this super secret pricing, that you'd be lulled into thinking it was really something special. Next story. Their machine doesn't do what they want it to, because they designed it and they're not engineers. Also, all investments into their company is investments into a long-term project that they're making out will take way less time than it will. Next story. I used to work at a zoo. I've got a few. One day, electricity failed, so the polar bears and wolves were able to break out of their barbed wire compounds. Zookeeper told me this while I was located in a kiosk that was situated right next to both the wolves and polar bears. Yikes. Luckily, they decided to not test the fences that day. A few baboons escaped. Zookeepers had to shoot one and tranquilize the others. Supervisor told me, quote, I would be fired immediately if I called the press. Thanks. A Swedish car brand called to ask if we were willing to rent them a moose for a commercial. We told them no, we do not rent out our animals. Probably the biggest one. One of our zookeepers saw that they had too much of a certain rat-like species. He was tasked to shoot them, but didn't have the heart, so he released them into the wild, without our supervisors knowing. A few years later, we have reports of these animals actually causing destruction to our embankments. Oops. I had to keep them secret while working there, but have been working other jobs for a few years now. Next story. I signed an NDA after negotiating a six-figure settlement with my mortgage lender. Back in 2013, the bank illegally sold my home, while I was living there and making monthly payments. I discovered this when new owners evicted me and my 3 kids. At the time, I thought someone was trying to steal my identity, etc. I spent the next 2 years writing legal documents and had to represent myself in court. The bank owned every legit legal firm I contacted. Also, the first lawyer I hired took my last $7,000 and was promptly disbarred for misconduct with previous cases. I had no money, no home, but I had a laptop, printer, and access to the county court law library. We were about a week away from selecting a jury when we came to a settlement agreement. In the end, each of my kids, now in their 20s, got an inexpensive new car, and I live at the beach. Which bank, you ask? I can't tell you the name, but might I suggest that it rhymes with case? They settled because they were worried that if the case went to trial, it would become public. Then everyone would know for certain that they had lied, cheated, and swindled to steal homes from hardworking people. The bank would lose when no one took out new loans with them. Edit. I received a posting on my front door. I went to the eviction court and lost, because technically the new owners paid for my house. I was given 7 days to move all my stuff, and had lived there for 13 years, or face the sheriff. I had 3 kids. I didn't want the drama of handcuffs, so we packed and moved, then sought relief through the court system. Next story. My best friend worked at a roadside attraction near Chattanooga, Tennessee called Ruby Falls. There's something else called Ruby Falls elsewhere in the country. It's supposedly a waterfall inside of a cave. Of course, the trail to the cave is redone with all sorts of rock brought in from around the world. I think they've owned up to that part now. But the waterfall itself is barely a trickle naturally, and then only in the wetter season. They've run a pipe up there to supplement the falls, hidden by cracks and crevices and cemented over, and powered by a pump off to the side, which you can't hear when the water is splashing down from 100 feet overhead. It's 99% from the city of Chattanooga, or maybe Lookout Mountain, municipal water supply. Of course, with such a wet area, old electrical wires going back to the Great Depression, and 300 feet underground, it sputters, or it shorts out and stops every now and then. The first rule in the falls room is make everybody leave immediately if the power goes out. Not for safety, but because the fable agreed upon will be shown as fake. Next story. I used to work for a construction company in rural Texas, and man, we did so much shady crap. Honestly, my boss was like the Joe Exotic of construction, always calling us the N-word, cussing us out, threatening to fight us. None of our haul trucks could pass a state inspection because he was too cheap to fix them up. He never paid his taxes on any of the tracos. Anytime the tax man would show up, we would have to drive all the equipment deep into the woods to hide it. He always paid the OSHA inspector off because he knew our shops couldn't pass inspection. We had mountains of scrap metal in the woods, mountains of old oil buckets stacked in the woods. We had an old rail car in the back that was full of oil, hydraulic, and transmission fluid. The cap was off, so when it rained, it overflowed and would just drain into the earth. I can't count how many times we would get some equipment in, and he would tell us to dump the fluid into one of the ponds. We always had guys up there trying to sell drugs and crap. Telling you, my 3 years there was wild. Next story. Popular dog kennel I worked for would have people leave their dogs for long periods of time. Dogs would stop eating. They wouldn't tell the owners this. People would leave beds and special toys and treats for their pet thinking they'd get these items, a little slice of home. These items would go in a trash bag and would be set aside. Treats would be thrown out. They used the excuse that it created too much laundry and that having personal items in a dog's kennel made them aggressive and protective over their stuff towards both humans and other dogs. Okay, but no. These are people's pets. They're not effing wolves. Short of making a Facebook post that no one would see, I had no real way of telling the public and risking some bullcrap lawsuit because I signed an NDA like a dummy. But I told everyone I knew with a dog to tell their dog owners not to send their dog there. Your dog can't tell you what happens when you're not around. Dogs would run into us with their tail wagging because they like the yard workers, but the conditions overall weren't great. Dogs are so good and loyal. Small spaces and loose regulations on how many dogs you can have at once. It still boils my blood when I drive by. Hopefully, things are better now. Edit. Wow, I hate that this experience was not unique. Not sure what's wrong with some people that they can't take good care of an animal in the absence of someone else watching. And for profit, no less. Hope all your doggos and cattos are okay. Next story. Well, Facebook moderators could disclose the trauma they've experienced moderating one of the biggest social media platforms in the world. They've witnessed horrific things that you would only ever think could happen in war. One anecdote was of a woman who saw a man stabbed dozens of times, begging for his life. Usually, they don't last long, but the things they see on the job stick with them for years after they quit. And unlike actual Facebook employees, they don't get paid very well or receive much at all in terms of compensation. Cognizant, the company that manages Facebook's moderation, offers them counseling while they work there, but the second they quit, they no longer have access to it and must either deal with the consequences on their own or get the money for a therapist. This crap is effed up, and the icing on the cake is the NDA, which means that they would take huge personal risk in warning anybody else about the job. New people signing up think they're getting a cushy job, albeit with relatively low pay, then get slammed in the face with things that no one should have to see, much less interact with as their job. Next story. I used to work in fine dining in Oklahoma City. Cocaine everywhere. I've personally walked in on several NBA players over the years, face down in that white girl. Come to mention it, I've seen several of them effing other guests on the same bathroom counter that their teammates just did a line off of. Personally got to watch Harold Hamm sign his divorce check. $975 million is a whole lot of zeros in a small space. Wild times indeed. Edit, for those that may want more stories, I did get to see LeBron covered in toilet paper. Hilarity ensued. Needless to say, she was escorted out. Next story. It's not an NDA, it's a secrecy agreement with DoD that elapsed after 25 years. I worked as a programmer for the U.S. Air Force on the global USAF budget in 1979 through early 1981. There was a period of time after Reagan became a leading candidate, but before he won the election or took office. Jimmy Carter was a lame duck president, and many senior officers really hated him. During this time, the USAF had flown the B-1, not the B-1A, not the B-1B. This was when it was just the B-1. People had spent a significant portion of their careers working on delivering the B-1 program. They really believed in the B-1 as a strategic long-range supersonic bomber. Jimmy Carter hated the B-1. He viewed it as a wasteful, unnecessary, bloated program designed to keep the builders afloat at the expense of the taxpayer. He had canceled the project in something like 77, but a couple flying examples were available, but never to see service. Reagan loved the B-1. It was everything he loved about our military programs. Fast, sexy, high-tech, and better than anything the Soviets had. All that being said, here's what happened. Jimmy Carter gave explicit orders that the only two, not certain, B-1s currently flying be broken up into parts. The program completely canceled, the engineering materials be archived at the Pentagon, and all funding ended. He wanted direct evidence sent to him that this had happened, in the form of pictures of the broken up aircraft. Ronald Reagan was informed of this order by sources in our organization. Reagan let it be known that Carter's order was absolutely not to be followed under any circumstances. Now, where do I come in? I was just this guy working on the AF budget. It was a top secret clearance, mainly because my analyst could correlate money to named projects, both globally and on bases. So one day I'm going over daily reports and I see this massive new expenditure for, I think, Wright-Patterson. It's not in the approved project list. It's not in the unapproved project list. So clearly it has not gone up to Congress. Yet the money is actually in the dispersal. So I go to my boss and I point it out. It doesn't belong there, so obviously it's a mistake. He agrees and we reverse it. A couple of days later, all hell breaks loose when a general officer I had never seen before comes rampaging through the office demanding to know who shorted his funding. Now, at this point, we get hauled into a room, sworn to secrecy, and told to fund this maintenance project. What was the project? Pay a huge team of contractors to very carefully disassemble one of the B-1s, drag in parts from other aircraft, show it being crushed, and send pics to Carter. Meanwhile, reassemble the plane and hide both of them inside black hangars. And that was why Reagan was able to have the program restarted literally within days of taking office. The program was fully back online in 1981. Next story. We reused buffet-style food served in a cafeteria that we're supposed to compost and record as waste. The health inspector says anything that's left open buffet-style and serve yourself can't be taken back and repurposed because it's not monitored and could be cross-contaminated or many other things. Nobody should ever eat buffet-style if it's avoidable, for your information. But the Fortune 500 company I worked for was unhappy about the money they were losing by composting the food, so they make us keep it and reserve it later or repurpose it into soup or casserole or something. Personally, I never did this and just waited for my boss to leave and compost the food, but others I worked with were too worried about losing their jobs to go against orders. I didn't want to be fired, but felt morally obligated to not feed people food that was meant to be garbage, so I just sneaky tossed it out when nobody was looking because I got paid really well there. We all had to sign NDA saying we wouldn't tell the media or non-employees about recipes and procedures that covered leftover food and food waste. Eventually, my boss discovered what I was doing, and I stood up to him about not being willing to reuse garbage as food, so we agreed that I'd just quit because while they could force me not to talk about it, they couldn't actually force me to do something illegal for my job, and I was clearly refusing to do it. Yeah, let's all give a gold star to OP here for doing the honest work, looking out for all of us, making sure that we don't eat food or consume anything that was meant to be garbage. Thank you for doing that. Next story. The $100 million electronic component broker that I worked for shafted me out of $900K in commissions when I was in my early 20s. They assumed I would not have enough money to fight them in court, and they took their shot. I got a lawyer on contingency, sued them, and took home a $500K settlement in 2000. The 20-year NDA recently expired, and they can continue to kiss my ass until their graves. Next story. I was in the military from '07 to '09. The unit I landed in had the second highest self-unaliving rate and lowest re-enlistment rate out of any unit in the entire military. 3 people jumped from the 3rd deck of the barracks, and I got a table thrown at me the day I got to the unit. On a training exercise, I got kept awake by a rotating shift of people for 5 days straight. Our NCOs poured salt water down the barrels of our cannons, so we would have something to do. I had to walk around a convoy of vehicles for 4 hours while everyone else got to sleep because I missed a platoon meeting that I didn't even know existed. I got pulled off a firing range, so I wasn't there for the briefing. I stood 2 separate fire watch shifts in one night because I didn't have my gear 15 minutes before a platoon formation. I was in the back of my Humvee that admin took to get us chow. I wasn't present when they said to get your gear out. Last I had been told was to leave it there. The corporal basically threw me under the bus. The crap of that one is if I'd kept my mouth shut and not gone to him with the problem, I'd have been fine as the Humvee with my gear in it got back on time. 3 NCOs came into my room to harass me for having some discoloring on my camis, and it almost turned violent, especially when I told them I didn't have the money to replace them. Punched an oak bookshelf instead. Broken pinky. A corporal told a PFC to get the MRE heaters out of a trash bag. PFC basically said, "Ha, lol, I'm eating," and didn't do it. Corporal then told me to do it while I had a spoonful of food in my mouth. I paused, looked at him, and he then tackled me to the ground and grabbed me by the neck and was choking me. At this point, I pulled out my knife to gut that prick. Our gunnery sergeant pulled him off me just in time. It eventually got to where I didn't trust anyone in my unit, and they had to separate me. They gave me an honorable discharge in exchange for keeping my mouth shut for 10 years about everything that went on. Edit 1. Forgot to mention the time when they had us fill out pre-deployment screening questions and 70% of the unit said they would unalive themselves or not stop a platoon mate from getting killed if they had the ability to. Our staff NCOs were told to rip them all up and stood over us while we filled out new ones to make sure we didn't tell the truth. This would have made the unit non-deployable and the funding would have been cut. Edit 2. In the course of this post, it had been pointed out that the NDA wasn't a real one and that some officer was playing one last mind game with me on the way out. Me, as a naive 19-year-old kid who didn't know any better, bought that hook, line, and sinker. Next story. I worked at a very beat-up zoo/amusement park. I ran the roller coaster. We weren't fancy enough to actually have a real roller coaster with one stop button and one go button. Instead, it was a crappy 2-story kid coaster and the brakes were manual. I was one of the 2 supervisors/trainers for this ride because it was very difficult to learn and you could hurt someone if you weren't careful. There were people who could run the ride, but only 2 people who could actually certify and train others to run it. So we have this hotshot, been working there for 3 months. He tells our boss that he should be a trainer. He knows how all the rides work, yada yada, and our idiot boss gives him the go-ahead. So Hotshot puts this girl, we'll call her Courtney, on the roller coaster and trains her. It takes a good week to learn the controls and probably another few days to get comfortable enough to do it by yourself. So I come in for my shift. Hotshot waltzes up to me with a crap-eating grin. "Guess who trained Courtney on the kiddie coaster?" I couldn't have ran faster. By the time I had gotten to the ride, the poor girl was losing her mind. Hotshot loaded up the carts full of people and just left her after a couple of hours of training. Courtney had been trained just enough to keep the coaster going slow enough it wouldn't fly off the tracks, but she couldn't stop the coaster itself. Those people were stuck on that coaster for probably 20 to 30 laps, when we usually just do 2. I had to sign an NDA after a whole bunch of customers threatened to sue the park. Ending of the story for those concerned. I jumped the tracks, Spider Monkey climbed into the control box, and stopped the ride for Courtney and let her take the day for herself. So traumatizing to be poorly trained and risk severely injuring people because some asshat took acid the night before work and asked for a promotion to be a trainer. And my boss let him. Next story. That married grocery store manager in his late 40s was, indeed, having relations with that 17-year-old courtesy clerk in the compressor room. This was 15 plus years ago when I was a person in charge, and not yet a full assistant store manager. Our store in the back room had a couple of rooms upstairs, a large room that housed all of our electrical breakers and backup generators, and a room that housed all our compressors that kept our freezers and coolers running. Both were locked at all times for security reasons. They were accessible only through the back room. The 17-year-old courtesy clerk, Bagger, had worked there for a while. She was not the best worker. She had a habit of disappearing for half hour or hour at a time. I and the other PICs complained and tried to discipline, but the store manager blocked it, so we just dealt with it. Yes, she was an attractive blonde. I was in charge one night and we got an alarm that one of the compressors was low. It was my job to check the level, record the compressor number, and turn it in. When I went up to the room, the door was propped open with a bucket. I assumed whoever worked in the room last left it open. If you've ever been in a compressor room before, I have to tell you that it's loud. Our store had several diesel engines that powered the compressors. I proceed into the back of the room, come around the corner to see the girl, not quite naked but not fully clothed, being serviced by our store manager, who had left for the day hours ago. Neither saw me, and I hightailed it out of there. I wrestled with what to do. I was worried about my career at the time, so I called the security hotline and made an anonymous call and told them in vague terms what happened and that they should contact me about details. I'm 100% certain they knew it was me that called. A couple days later, the store manager is suspended, and I'm interviewed. The assistant store manager is interviewed, and the PICs. They tell us not to discuss it, so of course we did. I was a little late to the party. Almost everyone knew. The store manager would use his store keys to come into the back room, meet the courtesy clerk, and then would hook up in the compressor room. She was not the first teenager he had done this with at this store and others. They fire the store manager, and like an idiot, he sues. Dozens of people are deposed, NDAs are drawn up and signed. He thinks better of it, drops the suit, and that's the last I ever heard of him. The girl quit right after the store manager was suspended. The audacity of this creep to try to play the victim and sue when you're the one doing all this, sick stuff. Yeah, you got what you deserve, buddy. Next story. Not me, but my cousin. He was working his first job in marketing in one of the top marketing firms in the country. My cousin is ridiculously good looking. Used to be a model for A&F, not just the local store models, but one of the national models, and dresses well. So he got the job, and his boss's boss, male, starts hitting on him ridiculously. He's invited to lunch, dinner, asked if he wants to go to the boss's weekend home, all the time turning him down. One time in the car, his boss told him how quickly he would advance if he spent the weekend with him, and my cousin recorded the entire conversation. He nopes the boss and then ghosts him on invites for weeks until the boss stops asking. Fast forward to 3 months after he's hired, and he's doing his review with HR, and his immediate supervisor is there. He starts to hear about how he's not a good fit, not a team player, etc. They let him know they were terminating him, and he grabbed the paperwork and they wanted him to sign and put it in his pocket. Then he pulled out his phone and played his boss's recording. After he was done, he looked at the HR manager and asked if she had anything to say. They both left the room acting shell-shocked, and he stayed there in the, I believe that says conference room, until the HR manager came back an hour later. She put her boss on the conference line, and they started telling him it was illegal to record private conversations. They would file charges, etc. He laughed and told them he would go to the press, and that he knows they would love to put him on TV. 3 days later, he's signing a non-disclosure and picking up a check almost big enough to pay for his 3 years of law school. For anyone wondering, no, the guy who harassed him was not fired, and he has since been promoted again by the company. Next story. Back when EpiPen selling for $400 was big in the news, I was part of an engineering student team working on a better and cheaper device. It would have 2 doses in 1 pen, since a lot of people are advised to carry 2 pens. You would administer 1 shot and then, if needed, twist the pen and then administer the second. The epinephrine cartridge was replaceable too, so if you didn't use the pen for a year or 2 and it expired, you just got the cheap epinephrine cartridge, epinephrine is cheap, and replaced it. I ended up leaving the team because no one was contributing to the project except me. Next story. This wasn't specifically under NDA, but I kept it secret for a very long time so I wouldn't lose my job. For nearly 10 years, I worked for a major online retailer. They had some outlet stores where they would sell returned items and extra inventory at a discount. I worked in one of these outlets for my first few years at the company and became an assistant store manager there. One day, my boss and I were by the dumpsters behind the store, going through our damage and destroy pile. Merchandise that was damaged or expired and had to be thrown out. The stuff had to be rendered unusable, so we'd take out some frustration smashing this stuff up before it went in the bin. One of the items was this retro-style record player that had come in on a pallet of merchandise samples, but it wouldn't even turn on. So we're going through all this stuff and finally got to the record player. I picked it up and smashed this thing on the ground. It didn't hurt the record player much, but the front of it cracked slightly. I picked it up, and there was a little piece of plastic sticking out of the front, like from a bag. I said to my boss, "Hey, there's a bag of something inside this." We ended up breaking the record player all the way open. Someone had disassembled it, taken all the electronic parts out of the inside, and replaced them with about 10 vacuum-sealed bags full of marijuana. This was in like 2008 or 2009, quite a while before states started legalizing recreational weed. There was at least a full pound of weed, probably more. I asked my boss what the F we should do. Should we write up a report? Call the police? My boss told me not to say a word to anyone. He said that if anyone else at our company found out, we'd be under a microscope. People could get fired, and we'd probably end up having to deal with a bunch of new rules. He called his friend who was a police officer and explained the situation, and arranged a meeting to surrender the weed. I emptied out a cookware box, put a price sticker on it, and loaded the weed inside. My boss met me at the front register, and I rang him up for the price on the box so he could get it out of the store without anyone being suspicious. He told me that he handed the weed over to his cop friend, who thought the situation was hilarious. In retrospect, there's a good chance that my boss just kept and sold it all, and the whole surrender it to the cops thing was a ruse, but I like to trust that people are honest with me. Never did find out where the weed came from, who was supposed to get it, or how it ended up at our store. Edit. Lots of folks saying he obviously kept the weed. While I do believe that there's a chance he did, I have many reasons to believe that he didn't. First, he was a drinker, but not a pot smoker, so he wouldn't have kept it for himself. Second, he was former military. The police officer he allegedly turned the weed over to was an old army buddy, and didn't mess around with illegal activities on the level of selling large amounts of drugs. Third, he'd been comfortable at his job for a while and understandably didn't want a shakeup. Fourth, we worked together for years and became pretty close friends outside of work. There was a time when we knew every detail of each other's personal lives. I asked him like a year ago about the weed we found, long after we both left the company. He still maintains that he surrendered it, and I think it's unlikely that he'd still lie about it after so long, especially since I'm an avid pot smoker these days and wouldn't care. Next story. If you create your own business cards at the design and print station at a certain office retail center, you're paying 4 to 5 times what you should because the whole system is done through Vistaprint.com. You could literally design and order the same amount and quality of business cards from your home for $10 as opposed to $39.99 or more you'd pay in the store. Sometimes Vistaprint will run promotions where you get 250 quality cards for free, but if you order them at this place, you're gonna pay out the wazoo for the exact same thing. Next story. I had a gay friend who was a bit flamboyant. Nothing crazy, he just wore the occasional pair of gladiator sandals, the one girls wear that look like they're about to go and head into the Roman Colosseum, and had a handlebar mustache. You'd believe such an eccentric character would be more open-minded, but he was actually incredibly racist. Turns out his great-grandmother lived in Nazi Germany and was on the German side of things during the war. To paint you a better picture, this old lady wore black to her grandson's wedding when he married a Jewish girl because the grandmother was, quote, mourning the loss. Over time, as the stories began to stack, we all began to grow more and more curious about my friend's great-grandmother to the point that I would occasionally ask him to just tell stories of her. Through this, I learned things like how she was physically present for events like the fall of the Berlin Wall and stuff like that, but never really anything about the woman's personal life. One night, my friend was drunk and blurts out how his great-grandmother was also a nuclear administrator for Hitler. I asked him if he was worried she would get found out, to which he replied that she burned her file herself. I'm not sure how true this story is as I'm telling it second and third hand, but there are some wild people out there. Next story. I was wrongfully terminated by a past employer. They lowballed the settlement offer and withheld payment on my accrued vacation. This part was actually illegal. It took about a year to get to the point where their attorneys realized that we were not lying about them holding back the accrued vacation, and this caused them to make a more than generous offer to make my claim against them go away. Next story. I no longer work here. However, my female boss, also owner of the company, had an affair that ended up in a divorce. The guy she had an affair, who lived a state away, 10-plus-hour drive, with basically told her to get the F out and that he wasn't leaving his family for her. It didn't stop her purchasing a property in the same suburb as the guy she cheated on her husband with in the name of the business, supposedly to do positive things for the business, yet make the decision to move into said property not even a month after settlement. Next story. Worked as an accountant, basically 4 of us having 100 plus clients. I don't know how it is in other countries, but here, for a wage company, has to pay certain taxes. For health insurance, pension fund, and whatever else. The tax is a set percentage, so higher the pay, higher the taxes. Most people here are on minimum wage, and median is maybe a bit higher. Bear in mind, your pension depends on these taxes, not only if you'll get it, but also the amount you get. So, as we did wages for these companies, we're ordered through a certain loophole in the law to make those taxes lower. The employee would still get his money, usually minimum wage, but taxes for that money were far lower. So if minimum wage is $300, pension would be $200 or so. With this method, pension would be $120. Given the weird nature of taxes and how they're calculated, it's very hard for someone who has no idea how they work to figure it out, and would have no idea until they receive less money. Then we fix numbers for profit and revenue to make other taxes lesser. We are also forced to give legal advice based on our limited knowledge of relevant laws. And as I had a law class in management studies I was best fitted for that, but basically knew jack. And not mention selling client data to rival clients if the money was good. Yeah, I booked out of there, my 3 coworkers a month later, after a few months, cause F going to jail cause some people are so greedy they avoid paying the minimum to live the luxury life as business owners. Next story. Technically, I'm still bound by the NDA, but the company didn't know how to write NDAs. It's like they had the following conversation. Legal. Hey, we need an NDA just like all these other companies have. Publisher. Do you know how to write an NDA? Legal. No. The NDA was for a role-playing game that I signed up to playtest with the group. The NDA itself actually forbade me, the person running the game and providing feedback to the company, from talking about it, but had no such restrictions in place for anyone I ran the game for. It only required me to sign it, not any of my players. The way it was written, I was not allowed to play the game with any of the players in the group. How they expected anyone to playtest the game, I don't know. The way that RPG playtests are supposed to happen is, the company releases a playtest document, people play it, and then they make changes for another round of playtesting. What actually happened is the company changed the core resolution mechanic of the game in the middle of the first round of testing, in the middle of a long message forum thread, based on the feedback of people who were openly admitting they only read the rules and hadn't actually played the game. One of the people who stated they hadn't played the game also said he didn't have a group of players they were going to play it with. So they changed the game based on nothing but feedback from people who hadn't tested anything. To top it off, after my group actually played the game and submitted feedback, we weren't invited back to the second round of playtesting. Also, we were left off the playtest credits. Next story. Worked at Disney World for an internship where they have their own police and fire station and hospital on grounds called Reedy Creek. If anything were to happen in the parks, a cast member or guest were harmed or needed medical assistance, they insist you call 911 from a Disney phone so that it will go to Reedy Creek, not the Orange County Police Department, so it's completely under the control of Disney. If you didn't have access to a Disney landline and absolutely had to use your cell phone to call the police, once the Orange County Police answered, you were required to request to be transferred to Reedy Creek to report the incident. Was also once told they forbid anyone from being declared dead on the park grounds. Instead, they'll list dead upon arrival at the hospital on official documentation, but that may just be a rumor. Now, I'm no expert on this, but I feel like that latter part would be falsifying medical information, which is a big no-no. Hopefully it's just a rumor. Next story. I did gay adult content in college. In order to protect one studio's particular branding, the NDA prohibited us from disclosing that we were not, in fact, broke straight guys and were, in fact, broke gay guys comfortable getting down on camera. Sorry to break the illusion, I guess. Next story. That health tracking app you use wasn't made for you. It was made to collect your data to be sold to big pharma so they could better understand what drugs they should push onto you and people like you. To some, this is obvious, but the amount of people who are surprised when I tell them this is shocking. Next story. University I used to teach at did not care what prospective students got for entry into the university. In multiple meetings I attended, they treated students as headcounts toward better course statistics, and if a single student was underperforming in a single semester, instead of removing them, they would give them just above the threshold to stay on. This happens across a lot of universities. Final grading decisions were not down to me, but course directors and head lecturers. I had raised it multiple times to an anonymous hotline at the university, but nothing was ever done. Next story. I used to be a helicopter pilot for a tour company in Las Vegas. Many of our guests came in nervous for their flight tour, even though commercial flight is leaps and bounds safer than driving. But it's okay, I get it. Helicopters are crazy, and they always explode in the movies. But what's really scary is how our managers value profits over flight safety. If the helicopter isn't flying, they aren't making money. For example, there was once a huge, and I mean massive, thunderstorm on my flight path. It doesn't take a genius to realize aircraft and thunderstorms don't mix. I told my manager I wasn't doing the flight that day. My manager asked me, "You mean you won't even try to fly through the storm?" I said nope, finished up my paperwork, and went home. Next story. The cosmetics company I worked for sold shampoo for dry hair, tangled hair, greasy hair, curly hair, fine hair, straightened hair, and colored hair. It also sold dog shampoo for puppies and another for adult dogs. It was all the same shampoo, bottled differently and with a couple drops of different perfumes mixed in. Next story. I was asked to sign an NDA to be able to see the magical device that was going to change the game for IT services. It was an APU board/case that had the company's logo stamped on it, and it ran pfSense, aka do-it-yourself router. This magical technology was and still is available for about $150 a unit. I got quite a strange look when I had to explain that their NDA would mean jack crap as the item was widely available and known. Side note, they are pretty awesome. For anyone wanting to use pfSense-based gateways and routers, it's a lot nicer than an old PC taking up a bunch of space.